Hello, my friends. It's Stacy of Stacy Creates Stuff, and it is Thursday of Jolly in July, which means it is time for an embroidery project. Today, we are going to be making this little fellow right here. Isn't he cute? Easy to make. He uses embroidery floss and some wool felt. I'm going to show you how to do the blanket stitch, French knots, a running stitch. So stick around and let's get stitching. The items that you will need for this project are the template, which I have already cut out because I already made one. But this is just a download file that's available by checking the description below. And you go ahead and cut it out of paper. I use my paper scissors for that. I am using wool felt. You can use polyester felt, rayon felt, whichever kind of felt you want. I happen to have this Weeks Dye Works hand-dyed felt that is named Gingerbread. So I thought that was appropriate for this project. I also have my fabric scissors to cut the wool felt. And then I have some embroidery floss for embroidering and decorating our little gingerbread man. And of course, with that, I have my embroidery needle and some fiberfill. I have a lot more fiberfill. All right, so let's get started. I have taken my piece of felt and folded it over because we want to cut 2 gingerbread men. I'm going to pin my little gingerbread in place here, being sure to go through both layers of wool felt. Now, if you have a marker or pen that will show up on your fabric, then you can certainly trace around him instead of pinning. I like to pin regardless because that way I can keep both pieces of felt together. But of course, you could cut the pieces separately as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut off that portion so it's a little bit easier to maneuver around. And then I'm simply going to cut all around the gingerbread man. All right, now that he is all cut out, I'm going to remove all the pins. And if there's any little spots I need to trim up, I can. I now have 2 pieces that are the same. And I'm going to take the top one and going to go ahead and embroider his little face and then any other extras that I would like. So on the first one that I made, I did his little face and eyes, and I gave him some French knot buttons. And I'm going to show you how to do some of these different stitches. In order for my white thread to really stand out, I am going to go ahead and use all 6 strands of floss. And I am just using DMC white floss. You can use any brand that you would like, and it doesn't even have to be white, whatever color you would like to use. Thread my needle, and I'm going to tie a knot in the end that will be hidden on the inside. Give them a snug little tug. And I'm going to start with the eyes. And so I'm going to go ahead and place those about there. And they're going to be a French knot. So I'm just bringing up my needle from the back to the front of the gingerbread man. I'm going to take my needle and place it near to his face and wrap the yarn twice around the needle. Then I am going to put the needle back down very close to where I brought the needle out. And before I pull the needle all the way through, I am going to give the thread that's closest to the knot a little tug so that it stays very close to the fabric. And then just pull that through nice and slowly. And that is your little French knot. So let's do another one. Again, bring my needle up from behind. I am just leaving that big stitch, and I don't want to pull too tight or else his face will kind of cave in a little bit. Wrap the needle twice with the thread. Go back in very close to where you came out, and before you pull the needle all the way through, grab the end that is closest to where you're making the knot, give it a tug, keeping it right at the base, close to the fabric, and then bring your needle through. I like to keep my finger on it just to keep it from moving away. All right, there are our little gingerbread man eyes. So let's give him a running stitch for the smile. I did a back stitch on this one so that the stitches were close together. And if you want to see how to do a variety of embroidery stitches, you can check my channel for my embroidery stitch playlist, and also check out Lauren's channel over at Garden Girl Studio, as she has quite a number of embroidery tutorials as well. So for the running stitch, it's just going to be I've brought the needle up from the back. I'm going in front to back, and then I'm just going to make little stitches following the direction that I want the smile. This is probably one of the simplest embroidery stitches. And when I'm finished with his smile, I'm just going to bring the needle to the back. And there you go. He's a happy little fellow. If you want to add French knot buttons, you can certainly continue by bringing your needle, again, from the back to the front and making the French knots the same way that we did for the eyes. I think on this, I'm going to do something a little bit different. So when you are done with the thread, you can just go ahead and make a knot on the back. And snip your thread. To sew the two pieces of gingerbread together, I just used a blanket stitch all the way around the gingerbread man. And on this one, I used the white thread because I thought it gave a nice contrasting look. I'm going to also do a blanket stitch on this gingerbread man, but I'm going to use matching brown thread. So this happens to be color 801, which matches quite nicely with this Weeks Dye Works gingerbread color. You may have to choose a different color to coordinate with whatever felt that you are using. Since the brown thread is going to be fairly hard to see in order to demonstrate the blanket stitch, I am going to show you on this scrap piece of wool felt. All right, with my end knotted, I am going to come in between the layers here. I'm going to start here just because I want to be sure to show you two types of curves, and I want to make sure I have enough thread for that. So I'm just coming through from the middle, and I am the distance away that I want the stitches to be. I'm going to pull that. Then align my pieces together. I'm going to come from the back and come up as close to where I originally came up as possible. And then before I pull that whole loop, I want to take my needle and go through the loop. And then I can give it a good snug tug. All the stitches are made from coming from behind and coming up through the top layer. I like to, before I pull the needle through, now bring that loop of yarn to the front and give it a little tug. And we're just going to keep doing that. Now, when you are on a curve that looks like a little valley, then you may need to space the stitches where you're coming up from the fabric a little further apart than you would on a straight run. And that is because the tops of these stitches are going to be closer together. They're almost making little pie shapes. The opposite is true when you get to a mountain curve. So now we're pretty much on a straight line until we start going around this curve. And again, just before I complete the stitch, I'm bringing the thread through. To the front of the needle. And now as I'm getting ready to go over this curve, then I need to make these, where I come up in the fabric, a little closer together. I think I can get one more stitch sort of, it's essentially on the straight. And this is because the top part of the stitch is now going to be a little wider. It has to travel a little further than the bottom part of the stitch. And that is how you do the blanket stitch. I have stitched partway around my gingerbread man, and I started right here on his side so that ultimately I can leave a little bit of a gap to be able to put the fiber fill into the lower part of his body. But I've done all the way around his arm, both arms and his head, and come down onto this side. So while I have this much of him open, I am going to go ahead and put some fiber fill in there. So I'm just going to take a small bit and work it right up into his head. And you can stuff him as firmly as you would like. I stuffed my first one fairly firm, but I think I'm going to keep this one a little bit looser. So again, I'm just going to put some fiber fill into his arm. The blanket stitch, if you use that for sewing the pieces together, is a very sturdy stitch. So you can really poke and pull without much worry of damaging or poking your finger through, as long as your stitches are close enough together. And they don't have to be super, super close. I did a much closer, smaller stitch on this one than I did on the first one. And when I have half his body stuffed, and I'm fairly pleased with that, there'll still be opportunity to add some more fiber fill into him before I completely close him up. And now I'm just going to continue stitching all around his legs and leave a gap big enough that I can get a finger or two in there to push some more fiber fill. I have finished sewing up the legs of the gingerbread man and have left a gap of about maybe 1.5 inches in there. It's enough for me to fit in 2 fingers to be able to poke in some more fiber fill. So now I want to go ahead and stuff his feet. I do still have the needle and the embroidery floss attached, so I'm being careful not to entangle that while I'm adding fiber fill. And again, you can stuff him as firmly or as softly as you wish. That is a personal preference. You do not have to use a blanket stitch to sew up your gingerbread man. You could sew him on a machine and turn him right side out. You could use a whip stitch. You could even use a running stitch. And when you are happy with how he is stuffed, you can finish sewing up the remaining little section. I have finished stitching up the last side of our gingerbread man, and I haven't attached my needle quite yet. I haven't knotted it off because I wanted to add a few little pieces, and I can tack down part of them with the same brown thread, and then I will switch colors of thread. So I just hand cut these 3 little holly leaves, not with any particular pattern, but I will be sure to include a little holly leaf pattern if you so desire. But basically it's, 3 little valleys, 2 little hills is sort of how I tend to do a holly leaf. And I am going to arrange them right here on the upper part of my gingerbread man. So I'll go ahead and poke my needle through, come up so I can tack the bottom end of the leaf. I'm going to be fine with these being a little bit free. They don't have to be totally tacked down. Certainly you could tack them down completely if you so desired. So I'm just going to stick my needle through, move that out of the way for a second, and being careful not to lose my needle inside the gingerbread man. There we go. I'm going to pull that through. And I'm just coming from the back of the leaf through to the front. This part is going to be covered up not only by the other leaves, but also by the tiny little holly berries. So I think I will tack that down. Just going to go down and then come up right next to that. Grab another little holly leaf, and we'll come up through the back of that one. And I can position that how I want that one to be. Since there are 3, kind of want to put them at angles that will work. And again, I'm going to go down through that one and try to come up fairly close to the other bottom parts of the leaves. There we go. And last little holly leaf. So again, coming up through the base of that leaf. And I'll position that roughly there. And I'm fine. They do have some wiggle room to reorient themselves. That is fine. And now I think I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to make several small little stitches. So I'm going to go back down and kind of come up behind one of the leaves, staying as close as I can to the base. There we go. And I can go ahead and knot off this thread. Try to make sure the knot is as close to the body of the gingerbread man as possible. There we go. And then I can just, I'm going to poke through to the other side, give a tug, snip my thread, and it'll disappear back inside the gingerbread man. So now I have my little holly leaves. I'm going to go find a embroidery floss that is the same color as my little holly berries, and I will put those on with French knots. I found some matching thread for the berries, and I went ahead and just used French knots to attach those to our little holly leaves there. So you can decorate your gingerbread man any way you want. You can embroider him. You could knit him a tiny little scarf. You could use buttons, jingle bells, any way that you want to decorate him. And you can see that he turns out to be a little skinnier than when he started from a flat piece. I hope you enjoyed making little gingerbread men as much as I did. They're so much fun, and there's so many things that you can do to dress them up. Be sure to check out my friend Lauren at Garden Girls Studios video tomorrow, which is all about how to wrap packages with fabric. I will see you again next week for week 3 of Jolly in July.